In this podcast episode, Tucker Carlson engages in a deep and wide-ranging conversation covering the escalating conflict involving the United States, Israel, and Iran, the broader geopolitical implications involving China, and the looming risks of a potential war with China. The dialogue explores the strategic significance of Chinese infrastructure projects, the complex U.S. Israel-Iran relationship, the future of Israel in its volatile neighborhood, the nature of American empire and global power, concerns about artificial intelligence, and the intertwining of religion and military influence in current U.S. policy. China's involvement in the conflict is largely reactive, shaped by unanticipated circumstances surrounding the U.S.-led war against Iran. A critical point of contention is the bombing of a strategic railroad constructed under China's Belt and Road Initiative, which connects China's Pacific ports to the Persian Gulf and beyond into the Caucasus. This railway corridor threatens to shift global commerce from expensive maritime routes to faster and cheaper overland transport routes, undermining dominant sea passages like the Suez Canal and Strait of Hormuz, thus challenging U.S. maritime supremacy. The United States and Israel targeting this railroad signals their awareness of an opposition to China's expanding influence. The railroad's disruption not only undermines China's economic and geopolitical ambitions, but also hinders its goal of breaking free from the current dollar-dominated financial system, aiming instead for the renminbi to replace the U.S. dollar in global trade and reserves, thereby neutralizing U.S. sanctions power. This overland route, echoing historic pathways such as those used during World War II to support the Soviet Union, represents a pivotal evolution in global trade logistics. The rail network's completion would dramatically reduce shipping times to Europe from days or weeks to mere hours, offering a considerable economic advantage. It also diminishes the strategic choke points of maritime navigation that have traditionally empowered Western powers. Consequently, maintaining control over or disrupting this corridor becomes a critical geopolitical objective for the United States, which views it as essential to its capacity to check China's rise and protect its own global interests. China's long-term strategy, dating back to Deng Xiaoping's reforms, avoids open conflict and focuses on overwhelming American dominance through technological, cultural, military, and economic advances. Xi Jinping's latest directive, largely overlooked in Western media, prioritizes undermining U.S. financial hegemony by accelerating the global adoption of the renminbi, dismantling institutions like SWIFT, and limiting America's sanction mechanisms. This strategy forms part of a broader ideological and geopolitical contest, as China seeks to curtail the devastating humanitarian impact wrought by American sanctions policies over the past 2 decades, which have caused millions of civilian deaths across various nations. Carlson reflects on the historical necessity for empires, particularly the United States since World War II, to maintain a constant external enemy to preserve domestic cohesion and justify military-industrial expenditures. The Cold War with the Soviet Union provided such a unifying threat. Without a comparable adversary, internal divisions deepen and political authority weakens. The military and political establishments have long resisted genuine peace, partly because perpetual conflict sustains influence and economic interests, including those of companies like Halliburton and Lockheed Martin. During the George W. Bush administration, there was a delicate balance in managing China, seen mainly as an economic competitor rather than a military foe. Leaders like Colin Powell attempted to avoid direct conflict and maintain stable but competitive relations, emphasizing economic engagement rather than confrontation. However, figures like Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld favored a more confrontational stance, hoping for a new Cold War, dynamic to sustain military and political objectives. This divergence reflected complex internal struggles about how to handle rising China. Past international crises, such as the simulated 2009 oil disruption exercise involving China, highlighted how critical the Strait of Malacca and other choke points are for global energy security. Efforts to maintain open sea lanes and manage oil flow were essential to prevent economic collapse. Present actions, including blockades and targeted bombings by the U.S. and Israel, risk pushing the world toward recession or even depression by interrupting crucial energy and trade arteries. This could accelerate China's drive to disengage from the dollar system and hasten a global economic realignment. Israel faces an existential dilemma amid increasing instability. Carlson expresses skepticism about Israel's long-term survival as a secure Jewish state under current conditions, given the continuous violence, regional hostility, and demographic challenges. He argues that Israel's original concept as a safe haven no longer holds true and suggests that its only viable future might lie in becoming a true democracy inclusive of Palestinians and other minorities. However, entrenched political leadership resists such transformation. The ongoing bombing campaigns in Lebanon, often funded and supported by the U.S., are aimed at repeatedly undermining Lebanon's economic capacity to prevent it from stabilizing or becoming a strong regional actor, further destabilizing the region. The podcast touches on the controversial motives for the U.S. and Israel's aggressive stance toward Iran, beyond the publicly stated goal of preventing nuclear development. According to Tucker, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's influence was decisive in persuading President Trump to escalate hostilities against Iran despite opposition from most military advisors. This decision appears to have been driven more by Israeli strategic interests than a clear long-term American strategy, a factor that could alter the U.S.-Israel relationship going forward, especially among younger Americans and within the MAGA movement, where support for Israel is eroding. Carlson and his guests discuss the history of political assassinations in America, expressing the view that many high-profile killings, such as those of John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., and potentially Charlie Kirk, bear the hallmarks of conspiracies involving multiple power centers within government and intelligence agencies. This pattern, they argue, reflects a broader reality of entrenched power structures violently suppressing challenges to the status quo. A concerning trend highlighted is the increasing fusion of conservative Christianity with the U.S. military establishment. Efforts are underway within the military to redefine soldiers as soldiers for Christ, promote religious oaths, substituting allegiance to secular constitutions with religious devotion, and replace qualified recruits with those lacking basic cognitive skills through manipulated standards. This mingling of religious extremism and state power threatens to subvert traditional American secular governance and exacerbate internal divisions. Looking ahead, Carlson voices serious concerns about artificial intelligence's potential to disrupt human autonomy, destroy jobs, and ultimately threaten human survival. Drawing on recent warnings from prominent AI developers and scientists, he notes that the young generation expresses palpable anxiety about a future dominated by AI systems with unclear controls or moral guidance. The risk includes both economic upheaval and existential dangers, possibly leading to conflicts between autonomous systems and humans. The conversation acknowledges the complete dismantling of pivotal arms control treaties such as the ABM Treaty and New START, raising the specter of unregulated nuclear escalation. This absence of regulatory frameworks enhances the risk that crisis moments in conflicts, particularly involving Iran or China, could spiral into nuclear exchanges, a prospect made more troubling by erratic leadership styles and diminished diplomatic channels. The podcast also touches on the surprising discord between the current U.S. administration and Pope Francis, particularly in the context of American Catholicism's internal divisions. There exists a movement seeking an American Catholic Church independent of Rome's authority, motivated by power struggles rather than theology. This schism reflects broader societal fragmentation and the creeping influence of nationalism and political agendas within religious institutions. Throughout the discussion, Carlson draws parallels between the current U.S. empire and historical empires, especially the Roman Empire, highlighting patterns of internal decay, external conflict, and the eventual collapse that comes from overreach, corruption, and loss of moral cohesion. The Cold War provided a unifying narrative that has since dissipated, leaving the U.S. vulnerable to similar decline. A recurring theme is the general American public's lack of understanding of geographical and economic fundamentals underlying global conflicts. Awareness of trade routes, infrastructure projects, and the financial system is crucial for grasping the stakes behind international military actions and could impact public support or opposition to foreign policy decisions as events unfold.